Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News Preview Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Samuel Rooke. What does around 400 million euros get you? Supposedly not the Champions League, which may have a very wealthy man questioning the one spending it, but more on that and the Ligue 1 weekend ahead after the latest headlines. Paris Saint-Germain came crashing out of the Champions League on Tuesday night after losing 2-1 at the Parc des Princes and 5-2 on aggregate. Cristiano Ronaldo sank their hopes early before Marco Verratti saw red. Edinson Cavani gave them a glimmer of hope, dashed by Casemiro's late finish. In the Europa League, Lyon will take an away goal back to France as they beat CSKA Moscow 1-0. Marcelo scored the only goal as they look to reach the final that will be played in their home stadium. Marseille also got off to a strong start to their round of 16 tie against Athletic Bilbao as they ran out 3-1 winners. 2 goals from Lucas Ocampos with a Dimitri Payet finish sandwiched in between and a controversial penalty for the away side, giving them a glimmer of hope in that second tie with that away goal. And that's all for now, but for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start tonight with a dissection, really, of that Paris Saint-Germain capitulation might be the best way to put it, really, because Sam, it was a strange game, really. Especially that first half. It felt like Real were for the taking. It felt like on the team sheet beforehand that they were possibly for the taking, but absolutely unequivocally, PSG just didn't turn up in this game.
Yeah, it was just a really disappointing performance. I mean, as you say, they were there to be beaten, but even if they weren't, even if Real Madrid had turned up and played 10 times better than they had done, PSG just didn't turn up at all. They just didn't put up anything. That first 45 minutes was dull as dishwater. It only got a bit interesting in the second half, but even then it was just so disappointing. It felt like the result was set. Some of the players speaking after the game, Rabiot saying, well, we knew we lost it in the first leg. Well, that's not a great attitude. Some of these other players saying like, well, next year we're better situated to try again. It's not the great attitude. That's not the attitude of champions, of people who will win the Champions League. If Real Madrid had lost, they wouldn't have been coming up with those sorts of palliative comments. They would have been angry, would have been furious. PSG weren't angry. The only one who was angry was Verratti, and he didn't exactly channel that positively.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting, I think, that one. Again, Marco Verratti sometimes in these kind of games, it's not always the big games necessarily, but in a lot of games where you see Marco Verratti charged up and you know that fire is part of his makeup, but the second yellow is absolutely unexcusable, isn't it? I mean, he absolutely sprints at the referee. I think I was listening to the great On the Continent pod by the Football Ramble guys and Andy Brassel mentioning that maybe he didn't realise how close the referee was because he almost knocks him over. He's sprinting so fast at him, and the referee couldn't wait to bring the yellow card out, really, because it was so petulant, so stupid, and at a time, really, where the game hadn't completely gone. That first goal did seem to bow the heads a little bit, but there was still time in that fixture. They were still having some okay moments, really, although there wasn't too many of them. And they did obviously equalise, really, on the night at least, after Verratti got sent off. But there's a lot of questions still for this side, really. And Sam, the worry for me as well in this one was the lack of... Di Maria had a decent game, and I'll give him credit there, but especially Edinson Cavani and Mbappe, they just couldn't get them into the game. They looked incredibly isolated throughout, didn't they?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a real problem. I mean, what Neymar has brought to this team is the ability to sort of break the lines, link the lines, connect the excellent central midfielders they do have with Mbappe, with Cavani, and kind of make everything tick a little bit. And once he goes out, Di Maria kind of does a similar kind of role, but can't quite do it as well. And you really needed one or both of those midfielders to really stride forward, bring those attackers into the game. I don't know if you've seen the pass maps for post-game, and it's just a blob of midfielders and fullbacks in the middle, and then these two tiny little dots up front of Cavani and Mbappe just entirely isolated, and that's the story. I mean, it's great that Mbappe's a 140 million euro player or whatever we're saying he costs these days. But if you don't give him the ball, you don't give him a chance to do something, find him in a bit of space, let him run at people with that unbelievable pace that he does have, let him take a chance. Give Cavani room to outmuscle someone. Give someone room to do something. It doesn't fall on those attackers entirely. I mean, maybe they could have done a little more to find a little more space, but it doesn't really fall on them. It really falls on the midfield and perhaps mostly on Verratti, who should be the leader of this team at this point. And something I'd sort of like to throw back to you, Nathan, I read the other day someone said that they don't think Verratti's gotten any better really in the last 2 or 3 seasons, and I wonder what you think to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really. A lot of people pull this one out of the bag quite often, that Verratti hasn't really necessarily moved on. And I'm a little bit in between. I agree. I don't think he's quite hit the levels he should be hitting, especially, I mean, he's really, in theory, a senior player at that club, really. Now he's been there for a long time. He's grown up with the team. He's starting to hit the prime of his career at 25. But I think even some people in the Italian press for the national team would also say that he doesn't quite dominate games as we'd hoped he would do maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when he does sometimes dominate games, but not at these crucial moments when they need him to, really. And that's maybe a sign of a few things. I would quite like them to build around the new midfield, at least anyway, around him, because that midfield on Tuesday night was awful, really. All 3 of them were awful. I mean, Verratti kept losing the ball and was swinging for heavens like the sort of madman he is. I mean, he looked even more dangerous of a yellow card than Sergio Ramos, which is almost unfathomable, really. And then you looked at Adrian Rabiot, who just essentially did nothing in the game. He admittedly stood there and took his punches after the game in the mix zone, really. One of the only players really to face the media. But it was a stinging criticism, like you said earlier, Sam, of him sort of being so blasé about it, sort of, we'll be there next year kind of thing. But he just didn't really affect the game. And Thiago Motta was anonymous to the point where at some points he was in front of those 2, which is baffling to me because they both need that cover and he should be the one to bring it. But he was practically a person non grata for that whole game. And I think that's where the game was lost, really. I mean, some people point to Marco Asensio's performance, who was absolutely sensational. He absolutely ruined Dani Alves and he pose the argument that maybe Thomas Meunier should have started. But the fact that PSG never had a link between the defence and the strikers, and that's why Edinson Cavani and Mbappe struggled. That's why when Neymar's in the pitch, maybe because he comes more centrally and does come a little bit deeper to try and receive the ball, that they have a little bit more invention. That's also maybe why it might have been worth the risk. And I want to throw this one at you, Sam, as well. It might have been worth the risk. We talked a little bit about this on Monday, how they sort of balance between playing maybe the safer 4-3, or do they take the risk and play someone like Draxler or Pastore in a 4-2-3-1 just to link up those players without Neymar? Do you think, I know hindsight is a great thing to have, but to play someone in that role, do you think they would have had a better opportunity to come out of here this one with a victory?
I think, as you say, I mean, we're looking at this, looking back, knowing that Real Madrid didn't exactly set the house on fire. They didn't come out firing. They were pretty happy to kind of let the game happen to them. So if you'd had a Draxler, someone like that, playing in a midfield, in a deeper role than perhaps he's best suited to, he is at least very good at those quick passes, quick movement, make things happen, move the ball along, and he can run at people. All of that together, if you maybe sacrifice even one of the midfielders just to make it a bit more fluid and a little bit more risk-taking, but taking it to Real Madrid, whose backline is, of course, amazing. But, as you mentioned, Ramos, capable of making silly mistakes. They're there to be got at. They're there to be attacked. You're playing at home. You need to score goals. Going safe, going with Thiago Motta at the base, and obviously not giving Rabiot the orders to really kind of stride forward and try and dominate the game. It was far too conservative approach for a team that needs to score goals, needed to at least make a statement. If you're going to go out trying to win the game.
I think that was the most frustrating thing on the night, is they just couldn't quite get the balance right, and the substitutions from Emery were a little bit unusual. Again, it didn't look like he was quite trying to push the boat out too late. He sort of made decisions maybe a little bit too late in this one because of the questions in the previous game, and that's really where the axe probably now will fall. And I thought mention this again to you, Sam, that we talked about this on Monday, that Unai Emery is on a tightrope, really, and the Champions League is the be-all and end-all. And arguably, Laurent Blanc, who was the manager before him, was sacked for losing to Manchester City in the quarterfinals. They've lost in the round of 16 to Real Madrid. It's the second time they've been eliminated earlier on by a Spanish side. The other one was possibly more, I don't know which one was more embarrassing, really, whether it was that sort of capitulation in one game or a series of games where really they only played for 15 minutes with any sort of decent vigour. Some people will blame the league, someone will and say that they don't get competitive enough. But if these games don't get you motivated to play at your very best, then you're clearly not cut out to win those kind of games, really. But this does put his position not just really under question anymore, but probably come the summer, he's out the door. I can't
imagine a situation in which he keeps his job and then stays for another season. I mean, not only have they flopped quite badly in the Champions League twice, I mean, even not topping their group last season was pretty bad. Then the collapse against Barcelona, that was inexcusable. They didn't want to be knee-jerk. Fine, that's actually quite respectable in a way. Give him another season, but now this tough draw, sure, but to show no real ambition in this game, and it's not great. And I can't see him keeping his job. He always seemed a very strange appointment, and I think it's a little bit symptomatic of the problems that the Real Madrid, that the PSG project has. They throw all this money at Flash, but at the functional parts, the planning doesn't seem to be quite there. The approach doesn't seem to be that well thought out. I mean, they went and they bought Neymar and Mbappe, but the defensive reinforcements they needed, they got a retiree in Dani Alves and Yuri, who apparently we're now calling Berniche. Those aren't Champions League caliber players for a team going forward. Yes, Dani Alves is a champion. Yes, he's produced some brilliant performances this season, but as he showed on Tuesday, he's not really at that level on the biggest stage anymore. Yuri, he's a functional player, fine, but he's not really good enough. Certainly not an upgrade on Kazawa, who himself is probably not good enough. And then the appointment of Emery is a similar thing. That you needed to pick the right manager. You need to pick a manager who fits the players and who fits the situation. Emery's a guy who thrived in Spain with Sevilla, with a team that was able to be functional and reactive rather than proactive. PSG have 80% of possession in every game in Ligue 1. Picking a manager who's not really built for that kind of football, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's manifested itself in Europe, where they've not been able to change their style because he's not the right guy for this team and for this project. And it was a very strange appointment from the start. And I can't imagine he keeps his job now.
Yeah, it's almost impossible, isn't it? I mean, he was brought in as that sort of European expert for the work he'd done in the Europa League, although I always still think that's such a strange sort of connection to make that the fact he won the Europa League twice means he's excellent in the Champions League. I think he showed that, and I think it's maybe a little bit harsh to say, but he is maybe a second-tier manager in terms of what they can get. And looking at the summer, there's a lot of interesting options for him. I mean, they might be, the reports are that their top target is Mauricio Pochettino, who would be an excellent signing if they could get him in. It would be a difficult one to fully pull off, given his commitment to Spurs at the moment and then moving into a new stadium as well. But he'd be a terrific option. You look at, we talked about Leonardo Jardim as well, possibly being someone that would go there. That would be another terrific signing. Luis Enrique has been looked at by a few different clubs in the summer as well after his sabbatical, which would be an interesting one. He's won a lot of things. He did reasonably well at Barcelona, but there's maybe still questions of whether he is a top tier manager as well. But a lot of interesting things to come probably for Paris Saint-Germain in the summer, because there should be some kind of upheaval. But let's talk about the Europa League now, Sam. And I know you had eyes on the CSKA Lyon game, the early game in the Europa League standings, and it's honestly a really, really good win for Lyon. CSKA have been pretty good at home this season. They've been pretty good in Europe this season at home as well. And this 1-0 victory is an absolutely massive bonus heading back to France in a week's time.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive result. really solid performance. Not particularly flashy, not particularly headline grabbing, maybe, but really important, really workmanlike, and that's what you needed from this team away from home, European competition. Genesio, after the game, he was disappointed they didn't get a second or a third and really kind of ram home the advantage that they had in the game. It was a terrible pitch, one of the worst pitches I've seen in European competition, somewhere between a cabbage patch and an actual sand pit. The quality, that was awful, and so that really played into the quality of the football. The ball didn't run true. There was a lot of bobbles, a lot of frustrating to watch from a footballing perspective, but Leon dealt with it better, and they were the better side, and they take a deserved lead home. And I think we were all a little bit worried that the wheels that have apparently fallen off in Ligue might follow them, falling off in Europe as well. But this is a really important result for them, and it really sets them up to move on and drive towards that final.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good result, and given that the fact that we'll come on to later that their league form has been pretty dire, to be honest, that this will be a massive result when them wanting to still get Champions League football, because really through Ligue and that looks out of the question really more than anything else. On to the other game this evening as well, in between Marseille and Bilbao, which I had eyes on for this one, and it was a really interesting game, really, to be fair. That Marseille really come out of the traps firing, and Bilbao have had an awful season. And I was looking at a few Spanish journalists mentioning that Bilbao over the course of the season have been pretty poor, and also in the Europa League, even though they have got through, it's more because other sides have gifted them opportunities to get in. And Marseille absolutely came out of the traps and scored 2 excellent goals. Tovan has a lovely assist for Ocampos' first one, and he uses sort of the outside of his foot just to sort of gently guide it into the goal. It's an absolutely lovely finish. Payet as well takes one down in the end and volleys it in after a bit of a hashed clearance, but a very controversial penalty. I don't know why they give it. The ref looks like he's given a corner. I think it's the 5th officials behind the line, isn't it? They gave the penalty, saying it struck his arm. It maybe strikes his arm, but it's one of those ones. I would call that a Spanish penalty for absolutely certain. One of the ones where it happens to hit an arm, and because it's in the box, that counts as a penalty in La Liga sometimes for some reason. But they stuck that one away. But credit to Marseille, they didn't dip in any way. They had a little spell, 10 minutes sort of the first half, where they weren't quite on song, and then Ocampos maybe gets a little bit lucky with the goalkeeper sort of fumbling his effort for the third in the back of the net. But that puts them in a really strong position as well to get into the next round, which will be massive, really, to have 2 clubs. So I'm in Liga and into the Europa League quarterfinals. That's a real bonus, not only for the league, but also 2 teams in a hat to possibly get that extra Champions League place as well. It's pretty good sign for starting things.
Yeah, I mean, if you sort of looked at the Europa League group stage about halfway through, you might have thought we'll be lucky to get 1 team to the knockout stage, and now looking pretty good to see 2 teams through to the quarterfinals. That's really impressive. That's really, really strong from Ligue 1. And if you've got 2 teams there, you've got a really good chance of going that little bit further. Semi-final, maybe Lyon can get that final at home. Maybe Marseille can do something really historic again. I've seen the goals from tonight. They look excellent. That team is really coalescing into something. But I saw that Tovan was stretched off. I don't know how bad that was. I don't know if you've seen how bad it was or anything.
Yeah, it was a strange one, really. He had a little bit of a knock earlier I think it was just at the end of the first half, where he was sort of hobbling a little bit. He came off very briefly, but was determined to come back on. But at a corner, he sort of stood on the foot, and he does go down pretty painfully. There is worries that they were mentioning in the commentary that it does feel like one of those ones where sometimes it reminded me a little bit of if you remember cast our minds back to when Wayne Rooney got that metatarsal injury against Chelsea, where he was stood on the foot. Looked a little bit like that, which will seriously worry Marseille fans and French fans, really, because he has been in terrific form. He set up one of the goals tonight and looked really dangerous again, and hopefully all will be okay. But yeah, to be stretched off is a real worry, because that means obviously that he couldn't really get off the pitch on his own power, and that doesn't bode well. Hopefully it was just a safety precaution, and they were just making sure that there's nothing to worry about. But there may be some worries for Marseille. I'm sure they'll be keeping their eyes on Twitter for the next couple of days, although they might not be on the official account, at least anyway, which has been strangely suspended by the LFP of all people for misguided guidelines. It's a very weird one that's happened this week. But on to the Ligue 1 games this weekend, and we start on Friday's fixture between Strasbourg and Monaco, because Strasbourg are still really probably in that relegation fight. They're just above where they need to be, but if they keep slipping up, they might slip back into it. They've been pretty good in the last couple of weeks. It was a bit of a terrible game against Montpellier a couple of weeks ago, but they obviously didn't really. Well, they bounced back to some degree, at least anyway. With a pretty poor result really against Caen. Really, they looked at times like they were getting back into the game, but Caen were just bullying them. There was a lot of bits of Enzo Crivelli trying to time waste as well, which really annoyed them. But they were just stifled a little bit too easily in this one. And although back at home they are a different sort of acquisition at home, when you think of the last two games they've gone unbeaten, and they beat Troyes as well. But this against the Monaco side that are really in top gear at the moment is a big ask.
It is, but I mean, as you say, at home, this season they're a top half side on form at home, so they got that in their pocket. Monaco, kind of on a funny run of decent but not great. Maybe this sort of the fire has kind of gone out a little bit for Monaco at the moment, because obviously not going to win the league. Lyon no longer snapping at their heels. Maybe it's a little bit hard to motivate themselves. Perhaps Strasbourg can sort of come at them with the aggression of a side in desperation and kind of hit them from that perspective. It's going to be very difficult, though. They've not beaten Monaco since 2002. So, history is not exactly on their side there. But, it's going to be tricky.
Really tricky. I mean, it's kind of flown under the radar a little bit. I mean, we've talked about Monaco a few times getting back into form, but what we've really not mentioned is it in all competitions really. They've only lost two since December. Well, the first game in December in Ligue 1, they won two. Well, they're 13 unbeaten. Well, I think it's 13 unbeaten in all competitions. I think in Ligue 1, and that's really impressive. And they stumbled that game against Toulouse, really, but before that, around that, it's 6 wins in 7 as well. That's really terrific stuff. And they came from behind against Bordeaux as well. The away side got a lucky goal through Varda. It was a really nice finish, but Monaco strode through, and Jovetic stepping up. He's now he's starting getting a better run of things as well, with Falcao obviously out at the moment as well. Ronnie Lopez continued his goal-scoring form excellently. Thomas Lemar looked like in that game like he's starting to rediscover his form. The defence for the majority of the part was a little bit better as well. I thought Fabinho had a really nice game as well. They've got a really excellent run at the moment. I mean, they do have to face Paris Saint-Germain in a couple of weeks' time, which will be really and that in the cup final, and then they've got them in April as well in the league at the Parc des Princes. So there's a couple of tough games left. But is it inconceivable to you, Sam, that much like the season before and a couple of seasons ago as well, that Monaco might go the rest of the season unbeaten?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we know that they are probably still, again, the second best team in France. I mean, we weren't saying that 3 or 4 months ago, but as you say, I mean, the run that they're on, it's very, very under the radar. No one's paying a lot of attention to them. But when they were stumbling in sort of December time, it seemed like, well, this is the end of that Monaco team. The dream is dead. But the second now, I mean, if they were to fall away and not finish in the Champions League now, it'd be a huge shock. 9 points ahead of Lyon. And yeah, they're scoring goals for fun. They're not conceding a lot, apart from the bizarre draw against Toulouse, but we won't talk about that one. The comeback win against Lyon, that was fantastic. The spirit is still there in this team, and they're sharing around the goals now. They're not relying on Falcao in the way that they were. As you say, he's sidelined, but they go on, they score goals, win games. A lot of the teams they've got yet to play are teams who are not playing for much. They've got to play Rennes, they've got to play Nantes, they've got to play, Lille are kind of playing for something, but there's not a lot of games on this schedule that should scare them, and going unbeaten, setting on another one of those big long records like they did last season. Why not indeed?
Why not indeed? Yeah, on a really good run of form at the moment. It's a shame that Paris Saint-Germain are obviously so far away that Monaco seem to play this catch-up game again, because like we remember last season, they went on an absolute tear to finish the season to actually win the league, because Paris Saint-Germain were excellent after they were eliminated from the Champions League. But well, it's going to be a really good season for them regardless, I think, with all the departures that they had in the summer. But let's get some predictions now. And Sam, what do you think in this one?
I'm gonna back Monaco to win it, but I think it's gonna be tight. I'll say 2-1.
I think it'll be 2-0. Strasbourg sometimes have a really good attacking intent, but just don't really sometimes follow through with it. Bahoken has had a good season. Terrier's had a good season, but they've never really can't push it on. Really, it's a bit of a disappointment. So I think it'll be 2-0 to a Monaco side that are really rising, and two teams that have had indifferences in form recently, one positive, one negative, and that's Bordeaux and Angers. In recent weeks, at least anyway, Sam, that Bordeaux have been, well, they felt like they recovered under Poyet. They had those 4 wins, the one coming just before his appointment. But since then, they've not won at all. They had that loss against Monaco where, like I mentioned previously, they got a little bit lucky, really, with the goal that put them ahead with Valentin Vard. It was an excellent strike, but it really came against the run of play. And after that moment, they really didn't get themselves into the game that much. Admittedly, it's 3 games that were tough. Marseille isn't the easiest place to go to at the best of times. Nice, they've sort of both cancelled each other out. They're both in sort of middling seasons. But is this a chance for them to get back on a horse, even though it's against an Angers side that have finally put back-to-back wins together?
Yeah, this is a really interesting game from Bordeaux's perspective, because as we talked about, they went on that great run when they brought Poyet in. Then they struggled in tricky games, and now it's a game that on paper they should be winning. Home to Angers, this is a game that Bordeaux should be good enough to win. But as you say, like, we're now going to sort of find out, was that a new manager bounce, kind of a dead cat bounce, or was it really the indicative of actual progress that was being made under a new manager? And this is the kind of game where we find out where exactly they sit. Are they a team who can react to those defeats, come back together again, or will they now just kind of limp along to the end of the season? Relegation's now no longer even a consideration. It'll be an interesting one, because Angers, obviously, they're much closer to danger. Bordeaux, comfortable, safe, mid-table, not a great deal to really play for, apart from sort of their places and the place of the new manager.
Yeah, well, one team that definitely have a lot to play for in this game is Angers, really, because we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, before that game against Lille, how big it was, and it was a massive victory to pull that one, especially after it seemed like Lille had sort of pulled themselves back into the game a little bit. So that massive win as well at the weekend against Guingamp, 3-0, it was a really, really strong win, and it's good to see them finally getting some goals in, because that was really where they were struggling, and it's good to see them come from different sources than Carl Toko Ekambi as well. He did grab one in that win, but Tate scored very, very early on. That helped settle the nerves a bit, and Ismail Traore grabbed that goal in the last bit against the Guingamp side that again sort of are middling into the end of the season again. But massive win for there. But with Bordeaux on a little bit of a dip at the moment, and they're now on 31 points, Angers in 14th, and have a real chance to start making a gap between them and the relegation places. This is an opportunity for them, isn't it, Sam, to keep that momentum going and keep going, because they're starting to score goals. Confidence is definitely starting to reign through them again. They've given Moulin a new contract, so there's plenty of security in their manager. They believe in him. They believe in his methods, and that's probably been integral to them now turning it around and now having an opportunity to pull even further away.
Yeah, I mean, look, we saw some fluidity from them earlier in the season, but it just wasn't really rewarded with the goals that it maybe deserved. They were maybe a team that sort of XG was more impressive than actual G. They weren't getting the goals, but they were playing okay. It just wasn't really happening for them. And against Guingamp, we saw that that's what happens when they get a bit rubber the green. But 3-0 win against a reasonable side who, admittedly probably weren't great on the day, but still. And now Angers are the top of the rest. They're top of all the teams that are really in consideration for relegation, and a win here would help them break away from that. A victory here would put them on 34 points, 6 points clear of 18th, and with not that many games to go, then you're really starting to feel like safety, progress for next season, keep developing on what's working. This would be a huge game for Angers to go and win. And they're playing against a Bordeaux team who are there, I think, to be beaten.
It certainly feels that way with the confidence that they have gained, combined with Bordeaux maybe dipping a little bit, that Poirier bounce they had sort of fading away, and maybe his tactical inefficiencies that we've seen in the past maybe starting to rear their head. Maybe that's contributing to their downfall, and maybe a great chance for Angers. So what do you think will be the score in this one, Sam?
It's going to be an interesting game. I think Bordeaux might be slipping back towards the stale style that we saw pre-Poirier. So I'm going to back Angers to win 1-0.
I think this will be an Angers win as well. I'm going to go for a 2-0 win, and maybe a Cambe double, because he's been really crucial at the moment, and now he started scoring goals and they're finding a bit of confidence. I think this will be the win that sort of pulls them out of the mire, really. And another really interesting game between sides that are maybe in, well, at least one of them in a position where they didn't really expect to be a couple of weeks ago, and that's Rennes, who have been on quietly again a nice little run of form. It's 3 wins out of 4 and a draw in the middle of that away to Caen, which is nothing to be sniffed at after a couple of losses. But they've finally started to get things together, really. They've, in those 3 wins, 3 clean sheets, every single one of those 4 games, they've scored 2 goals, which is a nice bonus as well. So they're starting to score. They're starting to learn their defensive solidity as well. They're getting some consistency in that run. Now they're in 5th, a point above Montpellier and Nantes. It's a great chance for them, isn't it, to get into the Europa League, which would be an absolute bonus for what their first half of the season seemed to peter away.
Well, this is a funny one. I mean, if you told people opening day of the season, yeah, Rennes in March will be about 5th, you'd have said, yeah, that sounds about right, based on what we thought, based on the money that had been spent, the team they're putting together. You thought, yeah, okay, well, this is that season for Rennes. But then 3 months ago, they were terrible. Everything had completely fallen apart, and you would never have believed they'd be up this high. I mean, this has been that kind of topsy-turvy season in Ligue 1 where most teams haven't been able to go on much of a run. So everyone was really bunched together. So for Rennes to be up this high again now, 5th in the league table, 3rd in the form table behind only PSG and Monaco, which is really impressive. They've got themselves out of that hole that they were in, and now they're looking up, and they should probably, they definitely aimed for Europa League at the start of the season, and now they're in that position, and they should really be charging on for it.
Absolutely, and credit to them, really. I think there's a couple of things you can point your fingers to as why they've been so successful recently. One of them is that summer signing, really, of Wabi Kazri, which was, I think, an excellent move, really. He's been really good for them. 9 goals this season tells you exactly his impact so far, and he scored a fair few in their recent wins as well. He's just got an extra level for them. He was really poor for Sunderland at times, but I don't think they really utilised him as much as they were. In those central positions, he's been excellent for Rennes, scoring plenty of goals, and they've got talent around him. I mean, Ismail Sarr's finally getting a bit more confident himself. Diafra Sakho's a good central striker to put in between those to link them up. They've already got good midfielders like Benjamin Andre and Benjamin Bourigeaud, who's had an excellent season. You mix in then Fatou Mawassa, hopefully can to rediscover something in a solid defence. Jalene and Yagnon seem to be building up a nice partnership, along with Thomas Kubek being a really solid goalkeeper as well. They have a nice little spine all of a sudden, and that changes a lot of things, really, for them. It makes them feel a lot more confident. Ben Sebaini's playing better as well, even when he's playing at left back, which might be making Rich faint more than anything with the amount of times he's had to criticise for them. But they do look a much better side recently, and they come against the side that don't look so good recently, at least. Anyway, they had some good results, but it's been a bit funny, really, for Saint-Etienne for a while. That draw against Lyon a couple of weeks ago was good, but they had to come from behind twice against Dijon, who are one of the worst team in Ligue 1 away from home. Excellent excellent home side, but awful on their travels. And Saint-Etienne allowed them in their game multiple times, and it was the 300th game for Ruffier, 400th game for Perrin, but especially for the latter, it was a tough one, and maybe a sign that he might be on the decline, unfortunately. Like Perrin, it might be Sam. He's looking like he's probably past his best.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the players in this team are kind of on a similar position. This Saint-Etienne really rely on a lot of these veteran players. Perrin, Debuchy's an old man at this point. Ruffier himself. A lot of them have seen better days. Subotic. I mean, you sort of just run through this team. It's a team, veteran experience and all that sort of thing, but there's not a lot of legs left in this team, and I think they've done enough to keep themselves up again this season. There was a brief worry that they might go down, and that would have been a really sad way for these not quite legends, but icons of the club maybe to end their time at Saint-Etienne. But it looks like there's going to be some tough decisions for Lever this summer, looking at these veterans who it might be time to move them on.
And it's a strange one because they've sort of mixed them with veterans as well. Like Perrin is playing with Subotic, who seemed like he's probably past his prime at Dortmund with so many little injuries. And I do feel a little bit sorry for Perrin. He's an excellent statesman. He's been terrific for them. He should have got a lot more attention from the French national team than he ever got afforded as well, which is such a shame because he's a terrific defender. And it just feels like he's lost something now. Those injuries that have happened over the last season or so sort of piling up on him, and maybe it's taken an inch out of his speed. And then when you are in a foot race with someone like he did with Tavares, who is not slow, but not rapid at the same time, when he scores Dijon's first, that will be a real disappointment for him. And it might feel like one of those Gary Neville moments against West Brom where when people start beating you, you start thinking, am I maybe cut out for that level anymore? And he don't take anything away from his career. He's been terrific, but Saint-Etienne are looking a little bit better. They've improved in form, but they still have that little bit of a strange edge to them. So it's going to be an interesting one again. Sam, what do you think the score will be?
I think Rennes, we talked about how they've improved. We talked about all these players who have sort of found their feet again, and they've been very impressive. But the thing that kind of fuels that strength, it's reactive. It's pace on the break. It's playing quick, sort of playing into gaps, playing reactive to what the opposition is doing. And when you're away from home, it's a lot easier to do that. When you're playing against a team that's going to come out and play football, it's a lot easier to do that. Playing at home against Saint-Etienne, probably not going to get those opportunities, probably not going to get a lot of space, not going to get a lot of the opposition pushing out at you. So I think they might struggle. I think this might be a little bit less of an attractive game and might be decided by the odd goal, but I'm going to call it a goalless draw.
I think Saint-Etienne are maybe flattering to deceive a little bit at the moment as well. They've had 3 wins, but they're against sides that they feel like they probably should be beating. But 2 good draws and a not so great draw. So I'm thinking Rennes will nick this one 1-0 and help strengthen their push for 5th, because that's still a little bit of a dogfight in its own right. But on to our final game, and it comes on Sunday between Lyon and Caen, and starting with the home side, really, Sam, who are winless in 6 in Ligue 1. They look like a different team sometimes in the Europa League, but they were really stagnant again at the weekend against Montpellier. We mentioned that it was sort of their nightmare scenario, really, more than anything, facing a side that do restrict space, that do force them to take those long shots, and unfortunately, so many Lyon forwards are too happy to oblige, really. And that sort of was the symptom of the game until they managed to find an equaliser somewhere to sort of nick one, and then didn't really look like troubling in them again. What's happened to Lyon, really, in the last couple of weeks? They've maybe been a little bit lax defensively, but that attacking quartet that was praised and lauded over the sort of first half of the season has just sort of fallen apart.
They have, and I think one of the problems we have to remember is this is a team that was kind of dismantled and put back together last summer, and put back together relying on a lot of very young players, a lot of players who've never played full seasons of senior football. Aouar and Dombele, these guys are not used to playing kind of week in, week out, playing European football and all that. And I think fatigue and inexperience is playing a part in it. Some of the strange mistakes, some of the wrong decisions being made in attack, like you say, taking shots from silly positions, things like that. It's a team that's built on inexperience and more on talent than kind of organization and planning. I think that those are the kind of the things that have coalesced into this run of indifferent form. I mean, every week we sort of come back to it. To beat PSG was incredibly impressive, and then to go on this run of just bizarrely indifferent football is almost equally impressive. Just really, really strange. But I think youth is a big part of it. I think Genesio's coaching, he makes very strange decisions. He makes odd substitutions. He doesn't set the team up properly. He's never found the balance between the attacking talent they obviously have and then a sort of more controlling organization in midfield. I think those are the problems. I think that's where it comes from. It's frustrating, but I mean, it's working for them still in Europe. So, you really can't be too critical, because if they manage to go on, win this tie against Moscow, get to the final, maybe win it at home, into the Champions League, then they're flying. But if they don't, the knives will be out for Genesio, and fair enough, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably time for those knives to start branding themselves. Well, facing a Caen side as well that beat them a couple of weeks ago in the Coupe de France as well, 1-0, and deservedly so. And a side that I managed to catch at the weekend again against Strasbourg, and I bet they must love when I tune in, because they seem to win every time I tend to watch a Caen game, and they were solid again. They're not afraid to be physical. They're not afraid to be to attack, to create. They were really interesting, really, again. And a number of players stood out. Again, I thought Enzo Crivelli was good. He was a right nuisance to the back line. He was pushing them. He was bustling around. He was, when they were trying to take free kicks later, he would kick the ball away from them a little bit. He'd waste some time. He'd sort of antagonize them as much as he could. I thought that as usual, Gilbert was very good down the right hand side. He's an excellent player that a lot of teams will look at in the summer, I think. Steph Peters, the Belgian, he's not played that an enormous amount, at least anyway, for Caen this season, but he was really good. He was really creative. He was trying to make things happen. He sort of was an extra outlet that they usually have Ronnie Rodeland be that man to sort of make things happen for them. But Peters in this one was good. And all of that with Ivan Santini on the bench, which is only a real bonus, because we've mentioned at times how reliant they are on the Croatian for goals and stuff like that. And to get a 2-0 win against a decent Strasbourg side that do want to play football, that's a really good result. And again, we've mentioned a few times, Sam, that Caen have had a pretty decent season. They are sort of sitting 12th. They look like they were going to tease around and fight for that 5th spot for a while, but they're certainly away from relegation, which is a credit to a club that size. And they don't play a boring style of football, which is all you can really ask for a Ligue side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, earlier in the season, we were all getting a little bit carried away, I think, when they were doing so well. They were winning games 1-0, but not in a defensive style, just hassling, just all together. It was really fun to watch, fun to see, and I think we all kind of hoped maybe it would last a little bit longer than it did, and for them to eventually sort of finish up where they are, very, very much mid-table, sort of definition of mid-table. That's great, for them, and hopefully this team more or less can stick together, keep that attitude, and maybe move up a little bit further next season. But like you say, resources-wise, they are a team that has historically lent on its academy, on its youth. They don't spend a lot of money. They operate on a very small budget. So to be where they are and to still be firing and to be beating bigger teams than them every now and then, knocking Lyon out of the cup, as you mentioned, that's huge. This is a really good season for Caen. This is the best season that they can realistically be hoping for. A chance at some silverware, albeit a small chance. They beat PSG, but still, and comfortably staying up. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, it's an absolute credit to them, and they've been really good at times. I mean, they've had some struggles this season occasionally. They've sometimes looked a little bit lackluster, and they lacked in some areas early this season, but I've been really impressed by how they've addressed it. And credit to Patrice Garande as well, again, that he's got this Caen side playing football again. He's got them well away from a relegation again, and he's absolutely must be revered there, because he's doing wonders with that club. But prediction time, do Lyon finally give up the slide, Sam?
I don't know. It's difficult, and I think they really have to put all their eggs into the European basket at this point. I think trying to reel back in one of Marseille or Monaco, realistically, it's only going to be Marseille. Monaco probably still too far ahead, and maybe if Marseille in a similar way do put all their eggs in the European basket, there's a chance. But I think Lyon need to focus on Europe. They need to probably rotate for this game with an eye on the second leg against CSKA, because they need to make sure they go through, and they need to make sure they're in good shape for the rounds to come. So with all that in mind, I think this is probably not a game that they win. I think they extend this winless streak even further than it is, possibly 1-1 again.
It feels like a 1-1, doesn't it? I'm maybe just edging towards Lyon breaking their duck just in this one. I think, and this is not a credit to Connor, it just feels like Lyon must have to break out of it some point soon. And home game against a side that don't always travel too well, against a side that can sort of be great one week, not great the next week. I think this is maybe the one to do it. At the same time, next week they've got Marseille, which doesn't look as positive, but I'm seeing a 2-1 win for Lyon, and maybe they finally break their duck just before they play their great rivals and CSKA Moscow as well in that return leg as well. That's all that we have for this week. My thanks to Sam and all of you listening at home. Join us for the main show on Monday, but for now, enjoy your weekend of football.